9 young hikers vanished during a snowstorm in the Ural Mountains, Russia. When they were found, their tent was torn open from the inside, bodies scattered across the snow, and one girl missing her tongue. More than 60 years later, the Dyatlov Pass mystery remains unsolved. In the winter of 1959, the northern Ural Mountains of the Soviet Union were cloaked in silence and snow. Temperatures dropped far below freezing, winds screamed across barren ridges, and the dense forests stood like sentinels under a heavy white shroud. To most, this was an unforgiving landscape, a place to be feared. Yet for a group of young hikers, it was the stage for their greatest adventure. 10 students and recent graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute set out on what was meant to be a challenging but rewarding expedition. Their destination was Mount Otorten, a remote peak north of Sverdlovsk, classified as a Grade 3 trek, the highest level of difficulty at the time. If successful, they would earn the coveted certification of Master of Sport, a title of pride in the Soviet Union. At the center of the group was Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old radio engineering student known for his discipline, intelligence, and leadership. Dyatlov was meticulous in preparation, a young man admired for his ability to stay calm in the harshest conditions. Alongside him were 9 others, most in their early 20s, all experienced hikers who had survived Siberian winters before. They were not reckless amateurs. They were trained, resilient, and determined. The team left Sverdlovsk on January 23, 1959. Photographs and diaries from the first days of the journey reveal a mood of optimism and camaraderie. They joked, sang songs, and even carried a mandolin to lighten the long frigid nights. Their journals described minor struggles, frozen boots, heavy packs, the monotony of snow, but also the joy of being young and free in a country where such adventures were both dangerous and deeply patriotic. But fate intervened early. One of the 10, Yuri Yudin, began suffering from severe joint pain due to chronic rheumatism. On January 28, just days into the trek, Yudin made the difficult decision to turn back. Tearfully, he parted ways with his friends, promising to reunite after their return. It was a farewell that would save his life. The remaining 9 continued onward. By January 31st, the group reached the base of the Otorten Massif. The weather worsened. Snowstorms rolled across the slopes, and visibility dropped. On February 1st, they decided to set up camp on the side of a barren mountain called Kolatsiakal, which in the language of the local Mansi people chillingly means the Mountain of the Dead. It was here, on this bleak, wind-scoured slope, that the Dyatlov group pitched their final tent. When Igor Dyatlov and his group failed to return on February 12, 1959, their scheduled arrival date in Sverdlovsk, no immediate alarm was raised. In Soviet expeditions of this scale, delays were not uncommon. Harsh weather, injuries, or route changes often stretched trips beyond the planned timeline. Still, as the days passed, worry turned into dread. Families of the hikers began pressing for answers, and by February 20th, the Institute organized a formal search party. The first teams sent into the Ural Mountains were composed of fellow students and volunteers. Soon after, the Soviet Army and local police joined, bringing in helicopters, planes, and soldiers equipped for mountain rescue. It was a massive operation, one that reflected both the urgency of the missing hikers' plight and the confusion about their whereabouts. On February 26th, after nearly a week of scouring the snow-covered wilderness, searchers made a breakthrough. At the upper slopes of Kolatsiakal, they spotted a partially buried tent. What they found inside would puzzle investigators for decades. The large canvas tent, big enough to house 9 hikers, was still standing but badly damaged. It appeared to have been slashed open from the inside, as though its occupants had cut their way out in desperation. Scattered around the site were boots, coats, food supplies, and diaries, belongings that no seasoned hiker would ever abandon. In sub-zero conditions, Snow covered the ground, but the tracks of several people were visible leading away from the tent, heading downhill into the forest. Strangely, the footprints showed that some had been barefoot, while others wore only socks, or a single boot. Following the tracks, searchers descended about 1.5 kilometers toward the edge of the forest. There, beneath a tall cedar tree, they discovered the first bodies. Yuri Krivonishenko and Yuri Doroshenko were found lying in the snow, stripped down to their underwear, with small burns on their hands and feet. Nearby were the remains of a small fire, suggesting that in their final moments, the two young men had desperately tried to warm themselves against the brutal cold. A few hundred meters closer to the tent, the search team found 3 more bodies: Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, and Rustem Slobodin. Their positions suggested they had been trying to crawl back toward camp when they collapsed. Dyatlov was lying on his back, fists clenched. Zinaida appeared to have fallen mid-stride. Slobodin had a fractured skull, but investigators noted that it was not severe enough to be fatal. Like the first 2 victims, they were dressed inadequately for the freezing weather. At this point, 5 bodies had been recovered, but 4 remained missing. For weeks, the search continued through blizzards and deep snow with no sign of the others. It wasn't until May 1959, 3 months after the first discovery, that the remaining hikers were found in a ravine, buried beneath several feet of snow. What rescuers uncovered there was far more disturbing. The last 4 hikers, Ludmila Dubinina, Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, Alexander Kolevatov, and Semyon Zolotaryev, had sustained horrific injuries. Thibault-Brignol's skull was crushed with force equivalent to a car crash. Dubinina's ribs were broken, and she was missing her tongue and eyes. Yet oddly, there were no external wounds consistent with an attack or fall. It was as if an immense pressure had been applied from within. Their clothes showed traces of radiation, something that baffled investigators and fed into theories of military involvement. The gruesome discoveries at Kholat-Syakhl only deepened the mystery. Why had experienced hikers fled their tent without proper clothing? What force had inflicted such devastating injuries without leaving obvious marks? And why was radiation present in their garments? The mountain had yielded its dead, but it refused to yield an explanation. The gruesome discovery of the 9 bodies left the Soviet authorities with more questions than answers. Almost immediately, investigators from Sverdlovsk arrived on the mountain, accompanied by forensic experts, military personnel, and local officials. The case quickly grew in scope, not only because of the strange circumstances, but also because of the political climate of the Soviet Union in 1959, a country where secrecy, control, and image mattered as much as the facts themselves. The initial examination, the first autopsies, revealed a pattern that baffled coroners. 3 of the hikers had suffered catastrophic internal injuries, multiple fractured ribs, crushed skulls, and internal bleeding. Yet their skin showed no significant external trauma, as if they had been subjected to a force capable of breaking bones without leaving cuts or bruises. One investigator likened the damage to that of a high-speed car accident. The body of Ludmila Dubinina raised further questions. Her tongue was missing, her eyes had been removed, and parts of her lips were absent. Although scavenging animals could have played a role, the precision of the damage left some experts uneasy. To make matters worse, traces of radiation were detected on her clothing and on the garments of another victim. Radiation testing was not a standard procedure in most cases, which suggested that investigators were already suspicious of a nuclear link. The 5 other hikers, though lacking severe trauma, appeared to have died from hypothermia. Their thin clothing and absence of shoes indicated that they had fled the tent in a rush, likely into temperatures below -30 degrees Celsius, -22 degrees Fahrenheit. Why they had done so remained inexplicable. The official reporting, May 1959, after months of confusion. The Soviet government abruptly closed the case. The official cause of death was recorded as, "The hikers died due to an unknown compelling force." The vague wording raised suspicions. Families of the victims wanted answers, but instead they were met with silence. Many of the case files were classified, and witnesses were ordered not to discuss the incident publicly. Rumors began to swirl, and with no clear explanation from the authorities, speculation filled the void. Theories emerged almost immediately. Multiple theories circulated. Avalanche hypothesis. Some investigators believed that a sudden avalanche struck the camp, forcing the hikers to cut their way out of the tent and flee. Yet there was no evidence of a large avalanche. The tent was still partially standing, and the slope was not steep enough to support a major slide. Military testing. Witnesses from nearby villages reported seeing strange orange orbs in the night sky around the time of the tragedy. Others pointed to the presence of radiation, speculating that the group had stumbled upon secret Soviet weapons tests. Some even suggested that the hikers were accidental victims of a missile strike or chemical experiment gone wrong. Mansi involvement. The indigenous Mansi people, who lived in the region, were briefly suspected of attacking the hikers. However, investigators quickly dismissed this theory. There were no footprints of other parties, and the Mansi had no known motive to harm. The group escaped from the tent. Another possibility was that the hikers had panicked due to some unknown stimulus, possibly a loud noise, an intruder, or a natural phenomenon, and fled without thinking. The footprints leading away from the tent, orderly and deliberate rather than chaotic, complicated this idea. A cloud of secrecy. By the summer of 1959, the case files were sealed, and the Dyatlov Pass Incident slipped into Soviet silence. Families were warned not to pursue the matter further. Officially, the world was told that the hikers had died tragically due to natural causes in extreme conditions. Unofficially, whispers of cover-ups, conspiracies, and hidden truths began to spread, whispers that would only grow louder in the decades to come. The Soviet Union had delivered its verdict: a natural disaster, nothing more. Yet the evidence mutilated. Bodies, radiation, mysterious lights in the sky told a story that was anything but ordinary. When the official Soviet report closed the Dyatlov case with the vague phrase, "an unknown compelling force," it did little to silence speculation. In fact, it had the opposite effect. Without a definitive explanation, the mystery of the 9 dead hikers grew into one of the most enduring enigmas of the 20th century. Over the decades, researchers, journalists, and conspiracy theorists have proposed countless explanations. Some are rooted in science, others in folklore, and still others in the uncharted territory between the two. The avalanche hypothesis. For many years, the avalanche theory was the most widely accepted. The idea was simple. A slab of snow broke loose above the campsite, forcing the hikers to slash their tent open and flee in terror. Some of them succumbed quickly to hypothermia, while others sustained fatal injuries in the chaos. This explanation gained traction because it fit a traditional survival narrative. Yet there were problems. The slope where the hikers pitched their tent was not steep enough to support a typical avalanche, and search teams reported no evidence of a major snow slide. Furthermore, the tent and supplies were still visible above the snow when rescuers arrived, suggesting no significant avalanche had buried the camp. Still, in 2019, Russian investigators reopened the case and, once again, pointed to a small avalanche combined with extreme winds. Critics remain unconvinced. Military testing and secret experiments. Perhaps the most enduring alternative theory involves Soviet military tests. The Ural Mountains in the late 1950s were an active area for weapons research. Witnesses from nearby settlements described seeing bright orbs of light in the sky around the time of the tragedy, fueling speculation that the hikers had encountered rocket tests or explosions. The traces of radiation on some of the clothing only deepened suspicion. Some suggested the group had accidentally wandered into a restricted area contaminated by weapons research. Others theorized that the hikers were killed by parachute mines, silent aerial explosives tested in the region. Such weapons could explain the severe internal injuries without external wounds. If true, this might also explain the government's decision to classify files and suppress discussion. The Mansi and local legends early in the investigation. The indigenous Mansi people were considered suspects. Their land included the area of Kolatsiakal, and investigators wondered if the hikers had trespassed on sacred ground. However, there was no physical evidence of an attack, and the Mansi had a reputation for peace. Still, the very name of the Mountain of the Dead, fueled darker ideas. Some claimed that ancient curses or spiritual forces were involved, especially given the bizarre injuries. This theory, while unlikely, found its way into folklore and continues to circulate in popular retellings. Infrasound and panic. In recent years, scientists have proposed the infrasound hypothesis. According to this theory, powerful winds sweeping over the mountain created a phenomenon as the Kármán vortex street, producing low-frequency sound waves. These waves, inaudible to human ears, can cause disorientation, panic, and intense psychological distress. If the hikers were exposed to such conditions, they might have been overcome with irrational fear, cutting their way out of the tent and fleeing into the night. Some collapsing in the snow, others fatally injured while stumbling into the ravine. This explanation is intriguing, but critics point out that infrasound-induced panic is speculative at best and does not explain the physical trauma or radiation, UFOs, and the paranormal. Finally, there are those who believe that the Dyatlov Pass incident was the result of something beyond earthly explanation. Eyewitnesses in nearby villages reported mysterious lights in the sky on the night of February 1, 1959. Some claimed they saw orange fireballs streaking across the horizon. To UFO theorists, the mutilated bodies and missing tongue suggested alien intervention. Paranormal enthusiasts, meanwhile, speak of curses, spirits, or interdimensional encounters. Though largely dismissed by mainstream science, these theories endure, especially among those who argue that no natural explanation fits all the evidence. The enduring puzzle. Each theory answers some questions but leaves others unresolved. If it was an avalanche, why no clear slide evidence? If it was military testing, why no official admission decades later? If it was panic, why such devastating injuries? More than 60 years later, the Dyatlov Pass remains a riddle. The truth, it seems, is buried with the 9 hikers beneath the eternal snows of the Urals. In the decades following 1959, the Dyatlov Pass incident never faded into obscurity. Instead, it grew into one of the most infamous unsolved mysteries of the 20th century. The combination of mutilated bodies, missing evidence, vague government statements, and whispers of cover-ups ensured that the case lived on in rumor and speculation. Years, the story was confined within the Soviet Union. Only after the collapse of the USSR in the 1990s did the outside world gain access to fragments of the original case files, photographs from the hikers' cameras, and testimonies from rescuers. These documents reignited global fascination and gave birth to countless books, documentaries, and even fictional adaptations. The Dyatlov Pass became more than just a tragedy, it became a symbol of the unknown, a puzzle that invited endless theories. In 2019, on the 60th anniversary of the tragedy, Russian prosecutors officially reopened the investigation. Their stated aim was to apply modern forensic techniques and finally resolve the mystery. However, they limited themselves to considering only natural explanations. After a year of research, they released their findings in 2020. The hikers had died as the result of a snow slab avalanche, compounded by extreme weather and darkness. According to this theory, a small but powerful shift of snow had struck the tent, trapping the hikers inside and forcing them to cut their way out. Injuries were consistent, the report claimed, with the force of compacted snow and later falls into the ravine. But critics argue this explanation still falls short. The terrain of the slope, the survival time of some hikers, and the radiation traces remain unaddressed. Many experts dismissed the new findings as another attempt to close the case, without confronting deeper questions. In 2021, a team of scientists from Switzerland published a peer-reviewed paper using computer models and snow dynamics. They showed that a slab avalanche, triggered by specific wind and snow conditions, was physically possible at Dyatlov Pass. Interestingly, they cited inspiration from Disney's Frozen. The film's snow animation software helped them simulate the mechanics of compacted snow. While their study added credibility to the avalanche hypothesis, it still could not account for all anomalies: the missing tongue, the radiation, the lights in the sky. For many, the complete answer remains elusive. The Dyatlov Pass incident has inspired more than just scientific research. It has seeped into culture, becoming a fixture of true crime podcasts, horror films, novels, and online conspiracy forums. To this day, hikers visit the site, leaving memorials at the Dyatlov Pass monument, where the names of the 9 are carved in stone. The tragedy embodies the collision of human ambition and nature's indifference, amplified by Cold War secrecy and mystery. For some, it's a cautionary tale about the unforgiving wilderness. For others, it's evidence of hidden truths still buried in Soviet archives. More than 60 years later, the Dyatlov Pass still resists resolution. Theories abound, from avalanches to UFOs, military cover-ups to paranormal forces. But none can fully explain every piece of evidence. Why was the tent cut open from the inside? Why did experienced hikers flee into freezing temperatures without proper clothing? What caused the catastrophic injuries to some, while others showed only hypothermia? Why were traces of radiation found on their clothes? And why did the Soviet Union close the case so abruptly? The Dyatlov Pass incident remains one of the most chilling unsolved mysteries in modern history. The 9 hikers, young and full of life, ventured into the mountains seeking adventure. Instead, they became the subjects of a riddle that has haunted generations. Perhaps the truth lies in a mix of natural disaster and human error. Or perhaps, as some believe, it is something far stranger, an encounter with forces we still cannot understand, until undeniable evidence emerges. The Dyatlov Pass will remain frozen in time, a story of courage, tragedy, and the eternal human hunger to explain the inexplicable.
Thank you for following.